I work at a haunted funeral home. I will die on my 50th birthday. My mother died on her 50th birthday. She knew it would happen 20 years before it did. And I will die the same way. Exactly 18 years from today, not a day sooner, not a day later. I know the exact date, the exact hour. I have it written on a piece of paper in my wallet right next to my driver's license, so that whoever finds my body will understand why I'm smiling. But before I tell you why, let me ask you something. Can you smell that formaldehyde? Sharp and chemical, the kind of smell that burns the inside of your nose and refuses to leave. Bleach underneath it, industrial strength, the kind I use to scrub the floors every night after the families go home. And beneath all of that, something else, something sweet, something wrong, like meat left too long in a broken refrigerator. That's the smell of my work. That's the smell of this funeral home. And tonight that smell is particularly strong. My name is Elijah Graves. I run my family's funeral home passed down from my father, and before that from his father, and before that from a man whose real name I never learned, because he changed it the day he started this work. The Graves family has always done this. Some families pass down land, some pass down recipes, some pass down businesses with friendly storefronts and cheerful customers. We pass down the knowledge of how to care for the dead. Graves isn't our real name. My great-grandfather changed it when he built this place because he believed that names have power. If you carry the name of the dead, you understand them better. You don't fear them, and more importantly, they don't fear you. I was named after the prophet Elijah from the Bible. My parents weren't religious people, but they believed that names matter. Elijah was the one who spoke to God and to the dead. They thought it fit our line of work. Now I'm 32 years old. I live alone in this building. No wife, no children, just me and the smell of chemicals and the weight of bodies that pass through these rooms every week. And Ember. Ember is the funeral home's dog. At least that's what I tell people when they ask. She showed up on the day my father was buried. I was 26 years old, standing alone in the hallway after the last guest had left, staring at the empty viewing room where his casket had been for 2 days. The front door was still open. I had forgotten to close it. When I turned around, she was there, sitting right in the middle of the doorway, watching me with eyes the color of burning amber. Black fur, short and glossy, solid-build muscles coiled beneath the skin, square muzzle, ears standing straight up, and 2 horns, small ones, curving back against her skull, tucked behind her ears, black as coal, smooth as polished stone. The first time I saw them, I thought I was hallucinating. My father had just died. I hadn't slept in 3 days. It had to be the light. It had to be shadows. It had to be my grief-addled brain playing tricks on me. The next morning, the horns were still there. I touched them, hard, smooth, real. I searched online for dogs born with horns. There were a few results: birth defects, abnormal bone growth, some syndrome with a Latin name I couldn't pronounce. I convinced myself that was the explanation. A genetic anomaly, a medical curiosity, nothing more. But that explanation didn't account for the fact that she knew my name. The third night after my father's burial, I was working in the prep room at 2 in the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The body on the table was a routine case, a 60-year-old man who had died of a stroke. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. The lights flickered, just once. A quick stutter, then back to normal. I looked up at the ceiling, annoyed. Old building, old wiring. These things happen. And then she walked into the room, the dog with the horns. The one I hadn't named yet. She walked past the threshold, sat down right beside me, and made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl. Something from deep in her throat, low and resonant, like the tolling of a distant bell. And in my head, not in my ears, inside my skull, I heard it. Elijah. I dropped the tool I was holding. My heart slammed against my ribs. I spun around looking for the source of the voice, for someone hiding in the corners, for a speaker or a radio or anything that could explain what I had just heard. There was no one. Just me and the body on the table and the dog with the black horns and the amber eyes. She tilted her head, like she was waiting for me to understand, and I understood. I named her Ember because her eyes had the color of fire still burning, and because something about her made me feel like I was standing at the edge of a furnace looking down into heat that could consume me if I stepped too close. Hellhound, that's what she is. That's what she's always been. The first week alone in the funeral home, I found the book. It was hidden in the locked drawer of my father's desk underneath a stack of old papers and a rosary made of black oak. The leather cover was worn soft with age. The pages had yellowed to the color of old teeth. And on the first page in handwriting, I recognized from the property deeds my great-grandfather had written rules for survival. Read carefully. Remember everything. Never forget. I read through the night. By the time the sun came up, I understood everything. I understood why my father always looked older than his years. I understood why he never took vacations, never traveled, never left this building for more than a few hours at a time. I understood why my mother sometimes looked at him with an expression that was equal parts love and grief, like she was already mourning someone who was still alive. And I understood what Ember really was. Not a pet, not a stray. Not a dog with a birth defect. A guardian, a gatekeeper, between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. You're listening to me because you want this job. Am I right? I read your application. You didn't ask about the salary. You didn't ask about the hours. You didn't ask about health insurance or vacation days or any of the things that normal people ask about when they're looking for work. You asked one question and only one. Is this job real? Yes, it's real. And if you're sitting here now in this office with Ember lying between us like a line that neither of us is allowed to cross, then you're qualified to hear the rest. I won't hide anything from you. I won't be like my father, keeping secrets, staying silent, hoping that everything would work out on its own. He died before he could tell me the truth. He ran out of time. I won't make the same mistake. I'm going to tell you everything, every rule, every story, every price, and at the end you'll decide. Stay or leave. Walk through that door and never come back, or sit down tomorrow at sunset and begin your training. But before we go any further, I need you to listen. Can you hear that silence for a moment? Then listen again. There, that sound. Coming from room 3. End of the hallway. Turn right. Something is scratching. Soft and rhythmic like fingernails dragging across wood. Ember just stood up from her spot on the floor. Her ears are pointed toward the hallway. Her body is rigid, every muscle tensed. There's a body in that room. A man 73 years old delivered this afternoon. I checked him myself, verified the death certificate, signed the paperwork. He died of natural causes, heart failure, nothing unusual. He's dead. Dead men don't scratch at doors. It's probably rats. Old building, remember? There are rats in the walls. It happens. But Ember doesn't react to rats. She's lived here for 6 years. She knows what rats sound like. And right now she's growling. Low, threatening. The kind of sound that comes from somewhere primal, somewhere ancient, somewhere that existed before dogs were dogs and humans were humans. The scratching stops. Silence. And then a voice. From inside room 3, a man's voice, old and hoarse and dry. Elijah. That's not the dead man's voice. The dead man doesn't know my name. He was a stranger brought in by the county because he had no family to claim him. I never met him when he was alive. He never knew who I was. Elijah, my son. That's my father's voice. My father has been dead for 6 years. And this is the moment when I should tell you about the rules. This is the moment when you need to understand what we do here, what we protect people from, and why Ember is standing between us and that hallway with her horns fully extended and her teeth bared in a silent snarl. Let's start with rule number 1. Every room in this building must be lit at all times, no exceptions. Hallways, Prep rooms, bathrooms, storage areas, the garage, the cold storage units, the viewing suites, every single space. Even the ones you're not using, especially the ones you're not using. You'll find the master switches near the front desk and in the basement utility room. Both are labeled. The lights are connected to the main power grid, but there's a separate generator in the storage shed behind the building. That generator is for the funeral home only. It's wired to cover every room. If the main power goes out, it kicks on automatically. If it doesn't, you go outside and start it manually. There's a crank panel on the left side and a red fuel drum next to it. The instructions are posted on the shed door. Refill it every week. Keep a funnel nearby. You're thinking this is just basic safety. Nobody wants to work in the dark with dead bodies. You're right. But that's not the real reason. Your main job here is to clean and prepare the dead. That's what everyone expects. Families come in, make arrangements, and leave. You wash the body, dress it, set it out for viewing, and eventually transport it for burial or cremation. Careful detail work. That's what people think this job is, but that's not the whole job. What nobody explains until you're here is that you're also responsible for identifying and responding to rot. Most people never see it. You will. Rot isn't decomposition. Rot is a spiritual condition. It shows up on bodies in ways that aren't natural. Sometimes it looks like burns, blistered skin, gray and black, but cold to the touch instead of hot. Sometimes it's lesions that don't follow any medical pattern. Spiral cuts, star-shaped punctures. The skin might be intact, but when you press down, the structure underneath feels soft and hollow like a sponge soaked in water. The mouth might hang open wider than it should, so wide that the corners tear toward the ears. The teeth might be too long, too sharp, row after row like a shark's mouth. Sometimes the limbs bend in ways they shouldn't. Elbows folding backward, knees rotating 180 degrees. Rot is what's left behind when a demon begins the process of possession but doesn't finish. The person died before the possession was complete, and the body is left in a halfway state. That halfway state is dangerous. Your job is to detect it. The dead carry what the living cannot see. That's what my great-grandfather wrote in the book. And if you want to see it, you need light. Shadows hide the truth. Brightness reveals it. Demons conceal their marks. They're subtle, especially at this stage. They hide in darkness. They wait in unlit corners. If the room isn't bright enough, you'll miss the signs. You might overlook a bruise that isn't a bruise. You might not notice a joint that's in the wrong position. In full light, you have a chance to catch it early. If the lights flicker or dim, check the bulb first. Sometimes that's all it is. But if you replace the bulb and the new one still dims, you move the body to another room immediately. You don't continue working. You don't finish dressing the corpse. You don't wait. Because a possessed body, even a dead one, can still function as a spiritual conduit. That means if the signs go undetected and the body is released to the family, the demon can complete its possession in a new host, a grieving spouse, a crying child, a tired caretaker, anyone who makes contact during a vulnerable moment. It doesn't happen often, but once is enough. The funeral home is the last checkpoint. We are the final stop before the body leaves controlled space. That's why containment matters. That's why we never let the lights go dark. That's why I'm standing here with a jar of salt in my pocket and a flashlight in my hand, looking at a door that should be quiet but isn't. The scratching has started again. And this time it's louder. "Elijah, come inside. Your father wants to talk to you." Ember is pressing against my leg, her body a solid wall of muscle and heat. She hasn't made another sound since that first growl. She's watching the hallway with the absolute stillness of a predator waiting for its prey to move. I should go into that room. I should deal with whatever is in there before it gets worse, before the signs spread, before the rot takes hold so deeply that ordinary measures won't work. But first, you need to understand the rest of the rules. You need to know why Ember is here. You need to know what happened the last time someone ignored the warning signs. You need to understand the price of this work. Because if you don't understand, if you walk into that room without knowing what you're facing, you won't walk out again. Not as yourself anyway. The room at the end of the hall used to be part of the east wing. There were 3 prep rooms down there, a cold storage unit, a hallway, and a bathroom. My grandfather used them every day for 30 years. Now that entire section is sealed. Concrete walls where doors used to be. Salt poured into the foundation. Blessed water mixed into the mortar. In 1987, my grandfather faced something he couldn't defeat. He survived. The building survived. The agreement that keeps us safe remained intact, but something escaped, something that couldn't be pushed back, only contained. It's still there, behind the wall, in the dark, waiting. Ember never goes near that wall. She stops 3 meters away and refuses to move closer. Sometimes at night I hear knocking from that direction. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more, like a reminder, like a promise, like something counting down the days until it gets to try again. The voice from room 3 has stopped. The scratching has stopped. But the silence is worse. Ember is looking at me now, her amber eyes bright in the dim hallway. She's waiting for me to make a decision. I reach for the door handle. The metal is cold, colder than it should be, cold enough to burn. I take a breath, and I push the door open. But what I see inside, what's waiting for me in the dark, what happens when I step across that threshold with nothing but salt and prayer and a hellhound at my side, that's a story for later. First, you need to learn the rules, all of them, because the rules are the only things that will keep you alive. And we don't have much time. Stay here, in this office. Don't leave no matter what you hear. Ember will know if I need help, and if I do, she'll come for me. But you stay here. Watch through the window if you want, but don't open the door. Don't follow any voices. Don't respond to anything that calls your name. Do you understand? Good. Now let me tell you about the rules while we still have time. The darkness inside room 3 was not ordinary darkness. I've worked in unlit spaces before. Power outages happen. Bulbs burn out. Sometimes you find yourself in a hallway with nothing but the glow of an exit sign to guide your way. That kind of darkness is empty. It's just the absence of light. This was different. This darkness had weight. It pressed against my skin like cold water, like something physical trying to push me back through the doorway. My flashlight beam cut through it, but the light only traveled 2 meters before it was swallowed, absorbed, eaten by something that didn't want to be seen. The smell hit me next. Decay multiplied by 10. Sweet in a way that made my stomach turn. Like dead flesh soaked in honey and left in the sun. Ember stayed at the threshold. She didn't follow me inside. Her body was rigid, every muscle locked, her amber eyes fixed on something I couldn't see yet. The growl in her throat was so low I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that traveled through the floor and into the soles of my feet. I took another step. The body was on the prep table. The 73-year-old man who had arrived that afternoon. He was supposed to be lying flat, arms at his sides, face peaceful in the way that death sometimes grants to those who go quietly. He was sitting up, not rising slowly, not struggling against stiff joints and rigor mortis. He was simply upright, as if someone had grabbed him by invisible strings and yanked him into position. His head hung forward, chin touching his chest. His arms dangled at his sides, and then his head lifted. The movement was wrong, too smooth, too controlled. Like a puppet being operated by someone who didn't quite understand how human necks were supposed to work. His mouth opened. Wider than mouths should open. The corners of his lips stretched toward his ears, skin pulling tight, threatening to tear. Inside I saw teeth, too many teeth, rows of them layered like a shark's, black at the roots and gleaming wet in the beam of my flashlight. My son said, a voice that came from that ruined mouth. Finally, you came inside. My father's voice. Perfect in every detail. The slight rasp from years of breathing embalming chemicals. The warmth that always made me feel safe when I was a child. The way he pronounced my name with a soft emphasis on the second syllable that no one else ever got right. I didn't answer. Rule number 2, never respond to the voices of the dead. They use sound as a weapon. They reach into your memories and pull out the voices of people you loved, people you trusted, people you lost. They know exactly which words will make you weak, which phrases will make you hesitate, which tones will make you step closer when you should be running away. If you hear the voice of someone who died calling your name from an empty room, do not enter. If you hear a child crying when there are no children in the building, do not search. If you hear someone begging for help from inside the cold storage unit, do not open the door. The sound is bait. It's designed to draw you into the darkness, to separate you from Ember, to isolate you. And once you're alone, they can begin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the salt. The thing wearing the dead man's body laughed. The sound was wet and wrong, bubbling up from a throat that no longer functioned the way throats were meant to function. Salt, it said. How traditional, how quaint. Do you really think that will stop me? I stepped forward. 1 step. 2. Close enough to see the details I had missed from the doorway. The skin on his hands was moving, rippling, like something was crawling beneath the surface, trying to find a way out. The veins on his forearms were pulsing slow and rhythmic, even though his heart had stopped beating 36 hours ago. Your father used salt too, the voice continued. It didn't save him. Nothing saved him. He's with us now, Elijah. He's been with us since the day he died. I poured the salt into my palm. Do you want to know where he is? The thing asked. Do you want to know what happens to the souls who sign the agreement? The salt burned cold against my skin. I could feel the energy in it, the potential, the centuries of belief and ritual that had been poured into this simple substance. I threw it into the corpse's open mouth. The scream that followed was not human. It was not animal. It was something older than both, a sound that belonged to a time before language, before civilization, before anything walked upright on this earth. It filled the room, bounced off the walls, shattered the light bulb overhead. Glass rained down. I covered my face with my arm. The darkness grew thicker, and the thing on the table laughed again. That tickled, it said. But salt alone isn't enough for me. I've been waiting here too long. I've grown too strong. Your little rituals won't work this time. The body began to move. It swung its legs over the side of the prep table, feet touching the floor with a sound like wet meat slapping against tile. It stood, and the way it stood was wrong. The knees bent backward, the ankles twisted at impossible angles. It balanced on its toes, swaying like a marionette with tangled strings. Elijah, my son, it said in my father's voice, don't you want to give your old man a hug? It lurched toward me. I had maybe 3 seconds to act, 3 seconds before it reached me, 3 seconds before whatever was inside that corpse got close enough to touch. Ember. She came through the doorway like a black arrow, silent and fast and utterly focused. Her body collided with the thing that used to be a 73-year-old man, and for a moment they were tangled together, hellhound and corpse, light and darkness. Then Ember opened her mouth. What came out was not teeth. What came out was light, amber light, the color of her eyes, the color of embers still burning in a dying fire. It poured from her throat like liquid flame wrapping around the corpse, forming a cage of brightness that the darkness couldn't penetrate. The thing inside the body screamed again. This time there was pain in the sound, real pain. Hellhound, it hissed. The voice was no longer my father's. It was something else now, something that sounded like 1,000 snakes speaking in unison. We don't fear hellhounds. But it was lying. I could see the fear in the way the corpse twisted and writhed inside the cage of light. I could smell the fear in the burning flesh, the smoke rising from skin that was beginning to blacken and peel. I ran to the other side of the table, pouring salt in a circle around the body. The words of the prayer came to my lips without thought, drilled into me through hours of practice, through nights of study, through the weight of generations who had spoken these same words in these same moments. The corpse thrashed, bones cracked, skin split. Something dark and liquid oozed from the wounds, not blood, something thicker, something that smelled like sulfur and rot. The prayer continued. each word a hammer blow, each syllable a nail driven into the coffin of whatever had taken residence in this dead flesh. And then between one word and the next I heard it. The thing spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears, entirely planting its voice inside my skull where I couldn't shut it out. Ask your father where he is, Elijah. Ask him what the agreement really means. You think you understand. You think you know the price. But you don't. You have no idea what's waiting for you. I didn't stop praying. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, the light would fade. If I stopped, the salt would lose its power. If I stopped, this thing would tear its way out of that corpse and find a new home, maybe in me. The prayer reached its end. The final word left my mouth like an exhale, and the corpse collapsed. The light from Ember's throat dimmed and then extinguished. The cage dissolved. The body hit the prep table and lay still, limbs splayed at unnatural angles, mouth still open but no longer moving. Silence. The kind of silence that follows a thunderstorm, heavy and ringing and full of echoes. Ember walked to my side and sat down, her flank pressed against my leg, warm and solid and real. In my head I heard her voice. It's gone, for now. I looked at the body on the table. The skin was charred in places, blackened where the light had touched it. The mouth had closed, but the teeth were still visible, still. Wrong, still too many. It would take hours to clean this up. Hours to restore the body to something that could be shown to a family if there was a family. If anyone came to claim this man who had died alone and been delivered to us by the county. But that wasn't the part that bothered me. The part that bothered me was what the thing had said about my father, about the agreement, about what was waiting for me. I had always known the price of this work. I had accepted it the day I read my great-grandfather's book. I would die on my 50th birthday, just like my father, just like my grandfather, just like every Graves who had taken up this burden. But I had always believed that death was the end, that when I went I would go peacefully, that my soul would be free. Now I wasn't sure. Now I wondered if freedom was ever part of the deal. Before I tell you more about what that thing meant, before I explain what I learned about my father and the true nature of the agreement, I need to tell you about Marcus. Because Marcus is the reason I take the rules so seriously. Because Marcus is what happens when someone doesn't. Marcus Chen, 28 years old, medical school graduate who couldn't pass the licensing exam. My father hired him 2 months before his death as a temporary assistant, someone to help with the workload while he prepared for the end. My father was already weakening by then, the way all of us weaken as we approach our deadline. He needed help and Marcus needed work. Marcus was brilliant, organized, efficient. He had the kind of precise, methodical mind that makes for an excellent mortician. He learned the physical aspects of the job in days, embalming, reconstruction, cosmetics, presentation. He picked it up like he'd been born to do it. But Marcus had one fatal flaw. He didn't believe. When my father showed him the book of rules, Marcus read it with the expression of someone humoring a senile relative. He nodded in the right places. He signed his name at the bottom of the page. He agreed to follow every instruction, but he thought it was theater, superstition, the quaint traditions of a family that had been in the death business too long. Demons, he said to my father once. It's the 21st century. I'll keep the lights on because OSHA requires it, not because I'm afraid of ghosts. My father didn't argue. He just watched and waited. The first week, everything was normal. Marcus learned the routines. He met with families. He prepared bodies. He did excellent work. The second week, Ember started following him. Not the way she follows me casually, comfortably, like a companion who enjoys my company. She followed Marcus the way a predator tracks wounded prey, always watching, always waiting, never more than a few feet away. Marcus thought it was funny. The dog likes me, he said. She's always underfoot. But Ember doesn't like anyone. Ember doesn't have favorites. Ember does her job, which is to guard this place and everyone in it from things that want to get in. When she follows someone like that, it means she's worried. It means she senses something coming, something that hasn't arrived yet, but will. The third week, Marcus stopped sleeping. He didn't mention it at first. My father only noticed because of the dark circles under his eyes, the tremor in his hands, the way he would pause mid-sentence, like he'd forgotten what he was saying. "Are you all right?" my father asked. "Fine," Marcus said, "just adjusting to the schedule. Night shifts are hard." But it wasn't the schedule. Marcus had started dreaming. I found his journal after everything happened tucked into a box of belongings he left behind. He wrote about the dreams in detail. Nightmares about being buried alive, about waking up in a coffin with dirt falling on the lid, about looking in a mirror and seeing his face rotting away. He thought it was stress. New job, new environment, daily exposure to corpses. Anyone would have nightmares. He didn't know that the nightmares were the first stage. Oppression, that's what we call it. The demon doesn't attack directly. It wears you down. Little disruptions, constant stress, sleeplessness, irritability, feelings of worthlessness, shortness of breath, arguments that start from nothing, accidents that happen at the worst possible moments. The goal is erosion. Demons choose their targets based on vulnerability. They don't go after happy people with stable lives. They look for grief, resentment, guilt, fear, people who have experienced tragedy, people under pressure, people already close to the edge. Marcus had failed his exams twice. His family was disappointed in him. He felt like a failure. He was working with dead bodies to pay off student loans because he couldn't get a job doing what he'd actually trained for. He was a perfect target. And he was working here. In a building saturated with the energy of the dead. The fourth week, Marcus started talking to himself. My father heard him in the prep room muttering under his breath. At first, he thought Marcus was reviewing procedures out loud, going through checklists, practicing for complex cases. Then he heard the words more clearly. "I know," Marcus whispered to the empty room. "I won't tell anyone." "Who are you talking to?" my father asked. Marcus looked at him with genuine confusion. "No one." I wasn't saying anything. That's when my father knew. That's when he realized what was happening. Stage 2, obsession. The demon focuses on the mind. It plants thoughts. It changes how the person sees the world. It begins to infect the body from the inside out. That's when rot starts to form. On the dead, rot is visible. It shows on the skin and the teeth and the way the limbs bend. You can see it if you know what to look for. On the living, it's harder to spot. Sleep patterns change. Speech becomes erratic. The person isolates themselves. They stop following routines. They forget things they used to know. They start ignoring the rules. Marcus began turning off lights. Not all of them, just a few. The storage room, the back bathroom, the hallway that led to the basement. "Waste of electricity," he said when my father asked. "Nobody uses those spaces anyway." Ember started growling every time he walked past. The 5th week, Marcus stopped eating. The 6th week, my father called me. It was the first time he had called in 2 years. I was living on the other side of the country, trying to build a life that had nothing to do with funeral homes and family obligations and the smell of formaldehyde in my clothes. "You need to come home," he said, "right now." I caught a red-eye flight. I arrived at 4 in the morning. Marcus was in the cold storage room. All 6 of the refrigeration units were open. 6 bodies had been pulled from their shelves and arranged in a circle on the floor. Marcus stood in the center, his back to the door, his shoulders shaking. Ember lay at the threshold, blocking the entrance. She looked at me when I arrived, and in her amber eyes I saw a warning. Too late to prevent, not too late to contain. "Marcus," I said. He turned around. His face was still his face, but his eyes were not his eyes. They were black. Completely, utterly black. No whites, no iris, no pupils. Just darkness from lid to lid, like someone had scooped out his eyes and filled the sockets with tar. "Elijah Graves," he said in a voice that was not his. "The prodigal son. Finally come home." The fight lasted 20 minutes. Ember and I worked together, her with the light from her throat, me with salt and oil and prayers I had memorized from my great-grandfather's book. The thing inside Marcus fought back. It bent his body in ways bodies shouldn't bend. It made him speak in voices he shouldn't have been able to produce. It threw him against walls and slammed him into the ceiling and made him claw at his own face with fingernails that had grown too long and too sharp. I poured salt into his mouth while Ember held him down. I dripped holy oil on his forehead while he screamed in languages I didn't recognize. I recited the prayers word by word, verse by verse, while his body convulsed and his skin began to split and something dark and terrible tried to claw its way out from inside him. And then finally silence. Marcus collapsed. His body went limp. His eyes, when they opened again, were brown, normal, human, but they were empty. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who I was. He didn't remember the funeral home, the job, the 6 weeks he had spent working here. He didn't remember my father. He didn't remember his own name. The demon had been expelled, but it had taken something with it on the way out, a piece of Marcus, a piece of his soul, a piece of who he used to be. He spent a week in the hospital. The doctors called it a psychotic break. They couldn't explain the injuries, the burns on his skin, the way his joints had been wrenched out of their sockets. They attributed it to self-harm, to madness, to some unknown medical condition. When he was released, he moved to Florida, changed his name, found a quiet job in an office somewhere. That's the best possible outcome. Many people don't get that lucky. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what happens when someone ignores the rules, when someone thinks they're smarter than the traditions, when someone decides that centuries of accumulated knowledge are just superstition and folklore. The rules exist because they work. The rules exist because people died to write them. The rules exist because every single line in that book represents a lesson learned in blood and fire and screaming that went on long after the human voice should have been capable of producing sound. If you work here, you follow the rules, all of them, without exception, without skepticism, without the arrogance of assuming you know better than everyone who came before you. Now, let me tell you rule number 2 in full. Never respond to the voices of the dead. I already told you the basic version. Don't answer when they call. Don't follow when they lead. Don't open doors when you hear crying or screaming or pleading from the other side. But there's more to it than that. The voices aren't random. They're not just noise designed to lure you in. They're targeted, specific, personalized. They reach into your memory and find the voices that matter most to you: parents, children, spouses, friends, lovers, anyone whose voice could make you drop your guard. Anyone whose words could make you hesitate. My father's voice called to me from room 3 tonight because the thing inside that corpse knew. It knew who I lost. It knew who I missed. It knew exactly which voice would make me pause at the door instead of charging in with salt blazing. It knew me. They always know. That's what makes them dangerous. If you hear someone you love calling your name, if you hear them begging for help, if you hear them crying and pleading and saying they need you, you have to ignore it. You have to cover your ears and recite the prayers and wait for Ember to confirm that the threat has passed. Because the real person, the one whose voice you're hearing, is not the one speaking. They're just a recording, a memory, a weapon being used against you. And if you answer, if you go to them, if you open that door and step into the darkness where they're waiting, you become the next target. You become the next Marcus, or worse. Speaking of voices. Can you hear that from room 3? The room I just left. The room where a burned and broken corpse is lying on a prep table, surrounded by scattered salt and shattered glass. Something is knocking. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. Ember just stood up. She's staring at the hallway again. The fur along her spine is raised. Her horns are fully extended, curving back from her skull like weapons ready to be used. And from inside that room I hear my father's voice again. Elijah, come back. We're not finished talking. It wasn't destroyed. It was only driven out temporarily, and now it's back. The lights in the hallway are flickering. One by one from the far end toward us, the bulbs are dimming and dying. The darkness is spreading, crawling toward us like something alive. I have to go back in there. I have to finish what I started. But this time I don't think salt will be enough. This time I might need to use the other tools, the ones I've never used before. The ones my father kept locked in the basement behind a door marked with symbols I don't fully understand. This time I might not walk out again. But that's the job. That's what we do. Ember's already moving toward the hallway, her body low, her muscles coiled. She looks back at me, once amber eyes burning in the growing darkness. Are you coming? I pick up the salt. I pick up the oil. I recite the opening words of the prayer, and I follow my hellhound into the dark. The hallway stretched before me like the throat of something vast and hungry. Each step I took felt heavier than the last. The darkness wasn't just blocking light anymore. It was actively pushing against me, resisting my forward motion, like walking through water that grew thicker with every meter. The flashlight in my hand flickered twice, steadied, then flickered again. I could feel the batteries draining faster than they should, as if something was feeding on the electricity itself. Ember moved ahead of me, her black form barely visible against the deeper black of the corridor. Her horns caught what little light remained, two curved silhouettes that seemed to glow faintly from within. She wasn't running, she was stalking. Each paw placed with deliberate precision, each movement calculated and controlled. The door to room 3 hung open. I had left it that way when I retreated. Through the gap I could see nothing but darkness, so complete it looked solid, like a wall of black velvet stretched across the door frame. The knocking had stopped. That was worse. When they make noise, you know where they are. When they go silent, they could be anywhere. I paused at the threshold. My hand found the jar of salt in my pocket, gripped it tight enough that my knuckles ached. The prayers were ready on my tongue, memorized so thoroughly that I could recite them backward if I needed to. Ember looked back at me. In her eyes I saw no fear, only readiness. Only the absolute certainty of a creature who had been doing this for longer than my family had existed. Now her voice said in my mind, "Before it grows stronger." I pushed through the doorway. The cold hit me first. Not the cool temperature of a room with poor heating, but something else entirely. A cold that bypassed skin and muscle and went straight to the bone. A cold that felt like fingers wrapping around my spine and squeezing. My breath came out in visible clouds. Frost began forming on the metal edges of the prep table. The salt I had scattered on the floor earlier was frozen solid, glittering like tiny diamonds in the beam of my dying flashlight. The body was no longer on the table. I swept the light across the room, searching. Corners, ceiling, behind the equipment cabinets, under the table, nothing, but something was breathing. I could hear it, slow, wet, labored, the sound of lungs that had stopped working, being forced to work again. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to locate. "Elijah?" My father's voice again. But this time it didn't come from a corpse's mouth. It came from the darkness itself, from every shadow in the room simultaneously. I didn't respond. Rule number 2. You can't ignore me forever, son. The flashlight died. The batteries gave one final flicker and then nothing. Total darkness. The kind of darkness that existed before God said, "Let there be light." The kind of darkness that waits at the bottom of the ocean in caves that have never seen the sun in the spaces between stars. But Ember was still visible. Faintly, barely, the outline of her body glowed with that amber light. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat pushing back the darkness, just enough that I could see her shape her position the direction she was facing. She was looking up. I followed her gaze. The corpse was on the ceiling. It clung there like a spider, arms and legs bent at angles that shattered the laws of anatomy. Its head hung down, rotating slowly on a neck that had twisted far beyond the point where vertebrae should have snapped. The mouth was open, stretched impossibly wide, and from inside that gaping maw came my father's voice. "There you are. I was wondering how long you would stand there in the dark." It dropped. I dove to the side. Ember lunged forward. The corpse hit the floor where I had been standing, the impact hard enough to crack the tile, and immediately it was moving again, scuttling, crawling, rushing toward me with a speed that dead bodies should not possess. Ember intercepted it. The collision sent both of them tumbling across the room. I heard the sound of teeth snapping, of claws scraping, of something wet and wrong being torn. Ember's amber light flared bright, forming that cage of radiance I had seen before, trapping the corpse inside. It screamed. The sound shattered what was left of the overhead light fixture. Glass exploded outward. I covered my face as fragments sliced across my arms, drawing thin lines of blood that immediately began to freeze in the unnatural cold. Through my fingers I saw the thing inside the corpse, fighting against the cage. It slammed against the bars of light, and where it touched them its flesh smoked and blackened. But it didn't stop. It kept throwing itself forward again and again, each impact weaker than the last, but each one still coming. "Your dog is strong," the thing said. It was still using my father's voice, but distorted, now stretched thin like taffy being pulled apart. "But she can't hold me forever, and you're running out of salt." It was right. I had used most of my supply on the first attempt. What remained in the jar was barely enough for a small circle, not enough to contain something this powerful, not enough to drive it out completely. I needed the other tools. The ones in the basement, the ones my father had kept locked away behind a door I was never supposed to open. I ran. Behind me, I heard the thing laughing. The sound followed me down the hallway, bouncing off the walls, filling the darkness with my father's voice twisted into something mocking and cruel. "Run, little Graves. Run to your father's secrets. You don't know what you'll find. You don't know what he really was." The basement door was at the end of the east hallway. I had passed it 1,000 times in my 6 years running this place. I had never opened it. My father had told me it was for emergencies only, for situations where nothing else worked. This qualified. The door was metal-heavy, secured with 3 separate locks and a deadbolt that required a key I kept on a chain around my neck. My hands shook as I fumbled with the locks. Behind me, I could hear the fight continuing. Ember's growls. The thing's screams. The crack and splinter of furniture being destroyed. The final lock clicked open. I pulled the door wide. Stairs descended into blackness. The smell that rose up was different from the rest of the building. Not formaldehyde, not bleach. Something older, something that reminded me of churches and ancient libraries and the dust of centuries. There was a light switch on the wall. I flipped it. Fluorescent bulbs hummed to life, one after another, illuminating a space I had never seen. The basement was larger than I expected. The ceiling was low, supported by thick wooden beams that looked older than the building above. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were things that made me stop at the top of the stairs and stare. Jars of salt, but not regular salt. Different colors, different textures. Some that glowed faintly in the fluorescent light. Bottles of oil marked with symbols in languages I didn't recognize. Books bound in leather that had darkened with age, their spines cracked and worn. Candles in every size and color, some burned down to nubs, others pristine and unused. Chains made of silver, of iron, of metals that had a greenish tint I had never seen before. And at the far end of the room, on a pedestal of black stone, a box. The box was made of wood so dark it was almost black, bound with bands of tarnished bronze. Symbols were carved into every surface, intricate and precise, forming patterns that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. I descended the stairs. The temperature dropped with each step. By the time I reached the bottom, my breath was coming in clouds again, but this cold was different, cleaner somehow, purposeful. I moved toward the pedestal, past shelves of supplies I didn't have time to examine. Behind me, I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, uneven, wrong. I turned. The corpse stood at the top of the staircase, silhouetted against the light from the hallway above. It was damaged now. One arm hung limp, nearly severed at the shoulder. The jaw had been torn partially free, dangling at an angle that exposed the throat. Black ichor dripped from a dozen wounds, sizzling where it hit the wooden steps. But it was smiling. "Your dog is tough," it said. The words came out slurred, mangled by the ruined mouth. "But not tough enough." She's resting now. Don't worry. I didn't kill her. I need her alive. For later. Fear spiked through me, Ember. If she was hurt, if she was unconscious, I had lost my only ally, my only protection. I was alone. The thing took a step down the stairs. The wood groaned under a weight that seemed far greater than the body should possess. I like this place, it said. All these tools, all these weapons. Your family has been busy. Generations of preparation. Generations of gathering strength. And you never even knew what was down here. Another step. Do you know why your father never showed you this room? Do you know why he kept it locked? I reached behind me, fingers searching for the box on the pedestal. Because he was afraid. Afraid of what you would learn. Afraid of what you would become. Afraid that if you knew the truth, you would run. My hand found the box. The wood was warm under my fingers, almost hot, thrumming with an energy I could feel in my bones. But you can't run, Elijah. Nobody in your family has ever escaped. Nobody ever will. I opened the box. Inside, nestled in red velvet that had faded to the color of old blood, was a knife. The blade was perhaps 6 inches long, made of something that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite stone. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a void in the shape of a weapon. The handle was wrapped in leather so old it had hardened into something like wood, and set into the pommel was a stone that glowed with the same amber light I had seen in Ember's eyes. I knew what this was. I had read about it in my great-grandfather's book in passages I hadn't fully understood. A weapon forged for a specific purpose. A tool of last resort. The thing on the stairs saw it too. Its smile faltered. Where did you get that? I didn't answer. I lifted the knife from its velvet bed, and the moment my fingers wrapped around the handle, I felt it. Power, old and vast and patient. The accumulated faith of generations. The concentrated will of everyone who had wielded this blade before me. That won't work, the thing said, but its voice had changed. The mockery was gone. Something else had replaced it. Something that sounded almost like fear. You don't know how to use it. Your father never taught you. But I did know. The knowledge was in the knife itself, in the handle that grew warm in my grip, in the blade that seemed to pulse with eagerness, in the stone that flared bright as my intentions crystallized. The thing on the stairs rushed me. It moved faster than anything dead should move. It leaped from the 4th step, arms, outstretched mouth gaping wide enough to swallow my head. Black ichor sprayed from its wounds. Its eyes, still locked on mine, were pits of absolute darkness. I stepped forward to meet it. The blade found the center of its chest. The impact was nothing like stabbing a normal body. There was no resistance. The knife slid in as if the flesh were made of smoke, passing through muscle and bone without slowing, burying itself to the hilt. The thing froze. Its hands were inches from my face. Its mouth was close enough that I could smell the rot of its breath, could see the blackened stumps of teeth, could feel the cold radiating from its ruined body. No, it whispered. The voice was no longer my father's. It was something else, something ancient and terrible and wounded. This isn't possible. You're not supposed to have that. I pushed the blade deeper. The amber stone in the pommel flared. Light erupted from the wound, pouring out of the thing's chest like liquid fire. It screamed, and this time the sound was different. This was genuine pain, genuine fear. The sound of something that had existed for millennia, suddenly confronting its own mortality. The body began to come apart. Not decomposition, dissolution. The flesh peeled away in strips that turned to ash before they hit the floor. The bones crumbled. The darkness that had animated the corpse fled, pouring out of the wounds in streams of black smoke that the amber light consumed. In seconds there was nothing left but dust and the knife in my hand and the silence of the basement. I stood there breathing hard, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. It was over. The knife's glow faded slowly, the amber stone dimming until it was just a polished gem embedded in ancient leather. I lowered my arm. My muscles ached. My hands were shaking. The cuts on my arms had stopped bleeding. the blood frozen in thin red lines across my skin. I climbed the stairs. Ember was in the hallway, lying on her side near the entrance to room 3, her ribs rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. She was alive, wounded but alive. I knelt beside her, ran my hand over her fur, felt the warmth of her body against my palm. There was a gash along her flank where the thing had struck her, but it was already beginning to close. Hellhounds heal quickly. It's one of the few mercies of their existence. She stirred at my touch. Her eyes opened, amber and bright and confused. "It's gone," I said. "It's over." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood, shaky at first, but steadying quickly. She shook herself, fur rippling. And when she looked at me again, there was something new in her expression, something that looked almost like respect. We went back to room 3 together. The room was destroyed. The prep table had been overturned. The cabinets were shattered, their contents scattered across the floor. The walls were scored with deep gouges, as if something with massive claws had been dragged across them. Salt was everywhere, mixed with broken glass and spilled chemicals, and the black ichor that was already evaporating, turning to vapor, that rose toward the ceiling and disappeared. Of the body, there was nothing left, not even ash. The thing that had possessed it had taken everything when it fled, leaving behind only the damage and the silence. I stood in the doorway, surveying the destruction, trying to calculate how long the cleanup would take. And then I heard it. Not from the room, not from the hallway, from behind me. "Elijah!" I spun around. The voice had come from the end of the corridor, from the direction of the east wing, from the sealed wall that marked the boundary of the section my grandfather had closed off 40 years ago. It was my father's voice again, but this time it felt different. "Elijah, please, I need to talk to you." Ember growled, but the sound was uncertain. Confused, she was looking at the wall with her head tilted, her ears rotating as if trying to pinpoint something she couldn't quite identify. I walked toward the wall. Every instinct screamed at me to stop. Rule number 2, never respond to the voices of the dead. Never follow when they call. Never trust the words of something that wears the face of someone you loved. But I kept walking. Because this voice wasn't coming from a corpse. It wasn't being projected through ruined vocal cords. It wasn't accompanied by the smell of rot or the feeling of wrongness that marked demonic presence. This voice was clean. This voice was sad. This voice was exactly the way I remembered my father sounding on the last day of his life. I stopped 3 meters from the wall. The same distance Ember always stopped. The same invisible line that marked the boundary of whatever was contained on the other side. Dad's silence. Then from beyond the concrete and the salt and the blessed mortar, I heard him sigh. "I was hoping you wouldn't have to learn this way." A crack appeared in the wall. Not a structural crack, not a sign of damage or decay. A seam of light amber gold running from floor to ceiling. It widened slowly, and through the gap I saw not the sealed rooms I expected, not the darkness and horror I had imagined, but something else. Mist, gray and formless, swirling like smoke in still air, and standing in the mist, visible through the widening gap, a figure. My father. He looked exactly as I remembered him. The same face, the same posture, the same slight stoop in his shoulders that came from years of bending over prep tables. He was wearing the suit we buried him in, dark gray, conservative, the same one he wore to every funeral he ever conducted. But his eyes were different. They were empty, not black like Marcus's had been, not filled with darkness or malevolence. Just empty, like windows in an abandoned house, like holes where something used to be. "Hello, son," he said. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around words that refused to come out. "You did well tonight," he continued. "The knife, the prayers. You handled it better than I did my first time. Your great-grandfather would have been proud, how I finally managed. How are you here?" He smiled, and even with those empty eyes, the smile was his, gentle, patient. full of the same quiet strength I had admired my entire life. "I'm not really here," he said. "I'm just a reflection, an echo. The agreement allows this much when the need is great, but I can't stay long. The agreement." The thing on the stairs had mentioned the agreement, had taunted me about it, had implied that there were secrets my father had never told me. "What is the agreement really?" I asked. "What happens to us when we die?" His smile faded. "That's what I came to tell you. That's what you need to know before you continue." He stepped closer to the gap in the wall. The mist swirled around him, clinging to his form like cobwebs. "When your great-grandfather built this place, he made a deal. The things that want to enter our world, the demons, the spirits, the entities that feed on the living, they need doorways, points of transition, places where the barrier between worlds is thin. I knew this. I had read it in the book. Funeral homes are natural doorways," my father continued. "We handle the dead. We prepare them for their journey. We stand at the threshold between life and death every single day. Without protection, we would be overwhelmed. The things on the other side would pour through us like water through a broken dam. So the agreement protects us, it does, but protection has a price." He looked at me with those empty eyes, and I saw sorrow in them, deep and old and heavy. "The agreement binds our souls, Elijah, every generation. Every person who takes up this work. When we die, we don't move on. We don't go to heaven or hell or whatever comes next for normal people. We go somewhere else. Where to them? To the things we spent our lives fighting. We become part of the barrier between worlds. We become the wall that holds them back." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're saying that when you died you didn't—" "Your grandfather's there too," he said softly. "And your great-grandfather, and everyone before them going back to the beginning. We're all there, trapped, holding the line, forever." The word hit me like a physical blow. Forever. Not years, not centuries. Forever. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would great-grandfather agree to that?" "Because the alternative was worse." My father's voice was heavy with the weight of truth. "Before the agreement, do you know what happened to families like ours? The demons didn't just possess the bodies that came through. They possessed the workers. They spread through towns, through cities, through entire regions. Thousands died, hundreds of thousands. The agreement stopped that. It gave us the power to fight back. But that power had to come from somewhere. It had to be paid for with something. With us. With us." I thought of my mother, sitting on the porch on her 50th birthday, smiling as she slipped away. Mom, too, she chose to go with me. She didn't have to. She wasn't bound by blood, but she took the work, took the responsibility, and when her time came, she walked into the fire with her eyes open. I was having trouble breathing. The weight of what he was telling me pressed down on my chest like a physical force. "So when I die," I asked when I turned 50, "I'll go to that place too. I'll be trapped with you forever." "Yes, unless you make a different choice. What choice? You can break the agreement." For a moment I didn't understand. Break it. Walk away. Refuse the fate that had been decided for me before I was born. "How the knife you're holding," my father said. "It's not just a weapon. It's a key. It was forged to bind the agreement in place. But it can also sever it. If you drive that blade into the wall behind me, into the heart of the seal your grandfather created, the agreement ends. The power we've accumulated over generations dissipates. The barrier we maintain falls. And then what? Then you're free. You live your life. You die a normal death. You go wherever normal souls go. No more 50-year deadline, no more eternal service, no more prison." I looked at the knife in my hand. The amber stone was dormant now, but I could feel the potential in it, the power waiting to be released. "What's the catch?" His empty eyes met mine. "If you break the agreement, everyone who came before you stays where they are, forever. We don't get released. We don't get peace. We remain in that place, holding back the darkness with no hope of ever being relieved." I understood then. The choice wasn't between freedom and service. The choice was between my freedom and their eternal imprisonment. You're telling me I can save myself, I said slowly, but only by damning you. All of you. Mom, Grandpa, great-grandfather, everyone, yes. Or I can continue the agreement, die at 50, join you in that place, and keep the cycle going. Yes, either way, someone suffers. He nodded. Either way. That's the nature of the agreement. That's why your great-grandfather kept it secret. He didn't want future generations to know the truth. He was afraid they would make the same choice he made out of guilt or obligation or family loyalty. He wanted to give them the chance to choose ignorance. But you're telling me, because you deserve to know, because the thing that attacked you tonight was sent to test this place, to probe our defenses, to see if we were still strong. Those tests are coming more frequently now. The darkness is pressing harder. And whoever runs this funeral home next, whether it's you or someone you choose to replace you, they need to understand what they're signing up for. He was fading. The edges of his form were becoming transparent, dissolving into the gray mist that surrounded him. I don't have much time, he said. The connection is weakening. But before I go, I need you to know something. What I'm proud of you. The words hit me harder than anything else he had said. You took over this place when you weren't ready, he continued. You learned the work alone. You faced things tonight that would have broken most people. And you're still standing, still fighting, still trying to do what's right. Your mother and I, we watch you. We can't interfere, we can't help, but we watch. And we're proud, Dad. Make your choice, Elijah. Whatever you decide, know that we love you. We always have. We always will. The gap in the wall began to close. Wait, I said. I stepped forward, reaching toward him. Wait. I have more questions. I don't know what to choose. He smiled one last time, that gentle, patient smile I remembered from my childhood. You'll know. When the moment comes, you'll know. The gap sealed. The wall was solid again. Concrete and salt and blessed mortar unbroken as if the opening had never existed. My father was gone. I stood there for a long time staring at the wall, holding the knife that could set me free at the cost of everyone who came before me. Ember pressed against my leg. Her warmth was a comfort. Her presence was a reminder that I wasn't alone. She was moving more carefully than usual, favoring her left side where the thing in room 3 had struck her, but she was here. She was alive. And she was waiting. I looked down at her. Did you know, I asked? Did you know about all of this? She looked up at me with those amber eyes, and I heard her voice in my mind. I knew. We all know. The hellhounds who guard places like this, we understand the bargain. We serve because the alternative is worse. Why didn't you tell me it wasn't my secret to tell? And would you have believed me if I had? She was right. I wouldn't have. I looked at the knife again, at the blade that seemed to drink the light, at the stone that held power older than my family, older than this building, older than the country it stood in. I thought about my father, trapped in some impossible place, holding back darkness for eternity. I thought about my mother who had chosen to join him. I thought about the 50 years I'd been promised, the 18 that remained before my time came. And I made my decision. I walked back to room 3. The destruction was still there, waiting to be cleaned. The overturned table, the shattered cabinets, the scored walls. Evidence of the battle that had raged here, evidence of what I had done. But in the center of the room where the body had been there was something new, a small pile of ash. Not much, a few handfuls at most. The remains of whatever had possessed the corpse. The physical residue of the demon I had destroyed. I knelt beside it. Ember sat next to me, watching. I could leave, I said. I could break the agreement. I could walk away from all of this, live a normal life, die a normal death. You could. But then they'd stay trapped forever. Mom, Dad, Grandpa, everyone, yes. And the next person who comes here, whoever takes over after I leave, they'd have no power, no protection, no way to fight what comes through. Yes, I reached into the ash, let it run through my fingers, fine and gray and still faintly warm. My great-grandfather made a choice, I said. He knew the cost. He paid it anyway. My grandfather did the same. My father, my mother. All of them. They could have run. They could have saved themselves, but they didn't. They chose to serve. I stood up, brushed the ash from my hands. So do I. Ember's tail wagged once, just once, a small movement that I almost missed. In my mind, her voice was warm. I knew you would. I looked around the ruined room, at the work that waited to be done, at the mess that needed to be cleaned before morning, at the building that was now truly mine. 18 years, I said. That's how long I have. 18 years. Then I'd better make them count. I set the knife down on the overturned prep table. I would return it to the basement later, to the box on the blackstone pedestal, to wait for the next time it was needed. For now I had work to do. I started with the salt. It took hours. The sun was rising by the time I finished. Orange light crept through the windows of room 3, illuminating the space I had spent the night restoring. The table was upright. The cabinets were empty, but organized. The walls would need repainting, but the gouges had been filled with plaster and smoothed over. The ash was gone. I had swept it into a container and sealed it in the basement on a shelf with others just like it. My father had never explained what those containers held. Now I knew. They were trophies, records, evidence of every battle that had been fought in this place over 4 generations. My contribution would join them. I walked to the front of the building, opened the main doors, stepped out onto the porch where my mother had died 6 years ago. The morning air was cool and clean. Birds were singing in the trees that lined the property. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked the sound of normal life going on for normal people who had no idea what had happened in this building while they slept. Ember followed me outside. She sat beside me on the top step, her body warm against my leg, her eyes watching the sunrise. She was healing quickly, the wound on her flank already fading to a thin line that would be gone by nightfall. We sat there together as the world woke up. And I thought about my father's words, about pride, about love, about the weight of choices made by people I would never meet for reasons I was only beginning to understand. I thought about the 18 years I had left, about the work I would do, about the battles I would fight, about the moment someday when my time would come and I would walk into that gray mist to join my parents. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. Regret was a weight I refused to carry. I had made my choice. I had accepted my fate. I had taken up the burden that had been passed down through generations. And I was ready. The first car of the morning turned into the driveway. A family coming to make arrangements, coming to trust me with the body of someone they loved. Coming to place their grief in my hands and hope that I would treat it gently. I stood up, straightened my clothes, put on the face of quiet compassion that families needed to see. "Welcome," I said as they climbed out of their car. "I'm Elijah Graves. Please come inside. We'll take care of everything." They followed me through the doors, and the work continued. The sun climbed higher as the morning stretched into afternoon. The family I'd greeted at dawn stayed for 3 hours. They were burying a grandmother, 87 years old, died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her. The kind of death everyone hopes for. The kind of death that makes my work feel meaningful instead of just necessary. I walked them through the arrangements with patience and care. Casket selection, flower preferences, music for the service. The small details that transform a funeral from a procedure into a farewell. They cried. They laughed at memories. They held each other's hands across my desk and thanked me for understanding. They had no idea what had happened in this building 12 hours ago. They couldn't see the fresh plaster on the walls of room 3. They couldn't smell the faint residue of sulfur that still lingered in the hallway despite my best efforts to scrub it away. They couldn't feel the weight of the choice I had made in the basement, standing before a gap in reality with a knife that could have set me free. That was how it should be. The living shouldn't have to know what the dead leave behind. After they left, I sat alone in my office. Ember lay at my feet, her breathing slow and steady. She had recovered faster than I expected, though she still moved with care, favoring her left side, where the thing in room 3 had struck her. Hellhounds heal quickly. It's one of the few mercies of their existence. The knife was back in its box in the basement. The salt had been restocked. The prayers had been reviewed and committed more deeply to memory. Everything was in order, everything except me. I kept thinking about my father's face, those empty eyes looking at me through the gap in the wall, the sadness in his voice when he explained what waited for all of us, the pride that somehow made everything worse because it meant he believed in me, trusted me, expected me to carry this burden with the same grace he had carried it. 18 years. That was all I had left. 18 years of work, 18 years of fighting, 18 years of preparing bodies and cleaning rot and standing at the threshold between worlds so that ordinary people could bury their grandmothers without worrying about what might follow them home. And then I would die. Not peacefully like the grandmother upstairs, not surrounded by family who loved me. I would die alone on my 50th birthday, and my soul would be pulled into that gray place where my parents waited, where my grandfather waited, where everyone who had ever done this work waited, holding back the darkness forever. I should have been terrified. I wasn't. There was something clarifying about knowing exactly when and how you would die. No more uncertainty, no more wondering if today was the day, if this illness was the one, if that car running the red light would be the end. I knew. I had a deadline, and everything between now and then was mine to use however I chose. I thought about Marcus, about the empty shell he had become after the demon was driven out of him, about the quiet life he was living now in Florida, working in an office, never knowing how close he had come to being consumed entirely. That could have been me, if I hadn't read the book, if I hadn't learned the rules, if I hadn't been ready when the thing in room 3 came for me. I could have ended up like Marcus, or worse. I could have become a doorway for something terrible to enter the world, but I didn't. Because my father had prepared me even if he hadn't told me everything. Because my great-grandfather had written the rules down, had preserved the knowledge, had made sure that each generation would have the tools they needed. Because Ember had been there watching over me, fighting beside me, keeping me safe, even when I didn't know I needed protection. I wasn't alone in this. I had never been alone. The realization settled into me like warmth spreading through cold limbs. I was part of something larger than myself, a chain of service stretching back generations, a family tradition that wasn't about death, not really. It was about protection, about sacrifice, about choosing to stand between the darkness and the people who couldn't see it coming. My ancestors had made that choice. My parents had made that choice. Now I had made it too. You're still here. I looked up from my desk. You had been sitting in the corner of my office the entire time, watching through the window as lights flickered and sounds echoed through the hallways during the night, waiting while I fought the thing in room 3. You had stayed through the long hours of cleanup, through the morning when the family arrived, through the silence of the afternoon. You hadn't run. That surprised me. Most people hearing what I had told you, seeing what you had seen, would have been out the door before dawn. They would have convinced themselves it was a dream, a hallucination, a stress-induced breakdown. They would have erased this night from their memory and never looked back. But you were still sitting in that chair, still watching me with those careful eyes, still waiting for whatever came next. I suppose you want to know if the offer still stands. I said, the job, the training, everything I promised before the thing in room 3 decided to make tonight interesting. You nodded. I leaned back in my chair, studied you the way Ember studied a body on the prep table, looking for signs of rot, of corruption, of something hiding beneath the surface. I didn't see any. What I saw was someone who had witnessed horror and hadn't broken. Someone who had watched me fight a demon with salt and prayer, and a blade forged in centuries of desperate faith. Someone who had heard my father's ghost explain the true cost of this work and hadn't immediately run for the exit. I saw someone like me. Before I let you answer, I said, there's one more thing you need to know. One more story I need to tell. Not about rules or protocols or the things that hunt us in the dark. About something more personal. I told you about my mother. Not the clinical facts. Not the date of her death or the cause listed on her certificate. The real story. The one I had never told anyone. My mother died on her 50th birthday. I was 26 years old. Just a few months before my father would follow her. Still living at home, still pretending I could escape this life, still telling myself that I would leave soon and never come back. I was angry at my parents for raising me in a funeral home. Angry at the smell of chemicals that never washed out of my clothes. Angry at the weight of expectation that pressed down on me every time my father looked at me with those patient, knowing eyes. I was so busy being angry that I almost missed her last day. She came down the stairs that morning at 7 o'clock. She was wearing a blue dress, the one my father had always said brought out the color in her eyes. Her hair was brushed back neat and simple. No makeup. She never wore makeup. She made coffee, read the mail, sat down at the kitchen table across from me. "Did you sleep well, fine?" I said. I was barely paying attention. I had a paper due for one of my classes. I was thinking about deadlines and grades and all the small concerns that seemed so important at the time. She nodded, sipped her coffee, watched me with an expression I didn't understand then but recognize now. She was memorizing me. She was looking at her son, knowing she would never see him again, and she was storing every detail in whatever part of her would survive the transition, the color of my hair, the shape of my jaw, the way I hunched over my laptop, too focused on meaningless work to notice what was happening right in front of me. "I love you," she said. I looked up. "Yeah, Mom, love you too." I didn't even say it properly. I was distracted, impatient. I wanted to finish my paper and get back to the illusion of a normal life I was trying to build. She stood up, walked around the table, and she hugged me. It was the longest hug she had ever given me. She held on like she was trying to press the shape of me into her body, like she wanted to carry some part of me with her wherever she was going. I could feel her heart beating against my chest, steady and slow. I could smell her perfume, something floral that she had worn my entire life. I should have known then. I should have understood what was happening. But I was 26 and stupid and so caught up in my own small world that I couldn't see the larger one collapsing around me. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said when she finally let go. She smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." Then she walked out to the front porch. Ember was waiting there, lying on the top step, watching the street with those amber eyes. My mother sat down beside her, rested her hand on Ember's head, looked out at the morning like she was seeing it for the first time. I went back to my paper. An hour later, I came downstairs for more coffee. She was still on the porch, still sitting beside Ember. But she wasn't moving anymore. Her head was resting against the porch railing. Her eyes were closed. That smile was still on her lips. I knew before I touched her. I knew, but I touched her anyway. Her skin was cool. Not cold yet, just cool like she had been sitting in the shade too long. I checked for a pulse. There wasn't one. I checked for breath. There wasn't any. She was gone. I sat down on the porch beside her. Ember was still there, her head on my mother's lap, her eyes watching me with something that looked like grief. We stayed there for hours. I didn't call anyone. I didn't move. I just sat with my mother's body as the morning turned to afternoon and the afternoon turned to evening. I watched the shadows lengthen across the yard. I listened to the birds singing in the trees. I felt the warmth fade from her hand as her body cooled and stiffened. And I understood finally what I had been running from my whole life. This was it. This was the work. This was what my family had always done, would always do. We sat with the dead, we kept them company, we made sure they weren't alone in those final moments between life and whatever came next. My mother had spent her life doing this for strangers. On her last day, I did it for her. I buried her beside the empty plot that was already waiting for my father. The headstones were in place. They had planned ahead, of course. They always planned ahead. The dates of their deaths weren't mysteries to them. They had known for decades exactly when they would go. My father followed her 3 months later, on his 50th birthday, just as the agreement demanded. They had kept the truth from me for as long as they could, letting me live in ignorance, letting me believe even for a little while that my parents would be around forever. But forever isn't part of this job. 50 years, that's what we get. 50 years to do as much good as we can, to fight as many battles as we can, to protect as many people as we can. And then we go to join the ones who came before us. That's the truth. That's the price. That's what you're signing up for if you decide to stay. I looked at you across my desk. You still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken, still hadn't given any indication of what you were thinking or feeling. So I said, now you know everything. The rules, the work, the cost. You know that if you take this job, really take it, you'll die on your 50th birthday. You know that your soul will go to a place that isn't heaven or hell, but something older and darker and more permanent. You know that there's no escape, no loophole, no way out once you've committed. I leaned forward. The question is, do you still want to do this? Before you answer, I want you to understand one more thing. You can leave right now. You can walk out that door and never come back. You can forget everything you've seen and heard tonight. You can live your life, grow old, die peacefully in your bed, surrounded by grandchildren who love you. Nobody will stop you. Nobody will judge you. Nobody will think less of you for choosing the path that lets you keep your soul. But if you stay, if you say yes, there's no going back. The agreement will bind you the moment you take up this work with full knowledge of what it means. You will become part of the chain, part of the wall, part of the protection that stands between ordinary people and the things that want to devour them. You will do work that matters. You will save lives that never know they were in danger. You will fight battles that no one else can fight, using weapons no one else can wield, against enemies no one else can see. And at the end, you will pay the price. Is it worth it? I don't know. I've made my choice. I've accepted my fate. But I can't make that decision for you. I can only tell you the truth and let you decide for yourself. I stood up from my desk, walked to the window, looked out at the afternoon sun slanting across the parking lot, the normal world going about its normal business, oblivious to the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. Take your time, I said. Think it over. Come back tomorrow at sunset if you want to stay. If you don't show up, I'll understand. I'll find someone else eventually. There's always someone willing to take up the burden. I turned back to face you. But I hope you come back. I hope you're the one, because I've seen what you're made of tonight. I've seen you face things that would break most people. I've seen you sit in that chair and listen without running, without screaming, without losing your mind. You have what it takes. I know it. The question is whether you know it too. I walked to the door of my office, held it open. Sunset tomorrow, I said. That's your deadline. After that, the offer expires. You stood up, walked past me into the hallway, paused at the front door. For a long moment you didn't move. You just stood there, hand on the doorknob, looking at the world outside. Then you turned back to me. I'll be here, you said. The first words you had spoken since the thing in room 3 started screaming. I nodded. Good. You opened the door, stepped outside. The sunlight caught your face, and for a second you looked different, older, more certain, like you had already made your choice long before I asked for it. The door closed behind you. I stood in the hallway watching your silhouette through the frosted glass as you walked to your car. Ember came to stand beside me. Her tail wagged once, just once. She was moving easier now, the wound on her flank nearly invisible beneath her dark fur. You think they'll come back? I asked her. Yes. Her voice in my mind was warm, certain. They're one of us. They just don't know it yet. I hoped she was right. I hoped I hadn't just condemned another soul to the fate that awaited all of us, but That was the job. That was the burden. That was the choice we all had to make for ourselves. I turned away from the door. There was work to do, bodies to prepare, families to comfort. A grandmother who needed to be dressed and made up and laid in her casket for viewing tomorrow morning. The world didn't stop because I had fought a demon last night. The world didn't stop because I had learned the truth about my parents. The world didn't stop for anything, and neither could I. I walked back toward the prep rooms, Ember padding along beside me. At the end of the hallway, I paused. From somewhere deep in the building, from behind the sealed wall that marked the boundary of the east wing, I heard something faint, distant, almost imperceptible. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. The thing behind the wall was still there, still waiting. Still counting down whatever countdown it had been running since 1987. One day I would have to deal with it. One day I would have to open that seal and face whatever my grandfather had been unable to destroy. But not today. Today I had a funeral to prepare. Today I had 18 years still ahead of me. Today I was still alive. And that was enough. I turned away from the sound of the knocking and walked into room 3 where a grandmother was waiting to be made beautiful for the family who loved her. Ember followed. The door closed behind us. And somewhere in the darkness behind the wall something laughed, low and quiet and patient. It could wait. It had been waiting for 40 years. It could wait a little longer, but it wouldn't wait forever. Nothing does.